This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, cosmic horror author Eric Malachite, and today's script was written by James CJ, so show him some love in the comments, drop your like, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves learning about places and the fascinating history behind them. Let's get to it. The seven wonders of the world are ones we all know, like Petra in Jordan, the Colosseum in Rome, the Taj Mahal in India, and the Great Wall of China, just to name a few. In the ancient world, that list looked extremely different. The seven wonders of the ancient world included classics like the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, and the Colossus of Rhodes. Egypt was the only country to have two wonders on the list. Both the pyramids of Giza, which are the only ancient wonders still standing today and are considered an honorary wonder, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Alexandria had become a thriving city during the reign of Ptolemy I Soter and his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus. Soter is credited with putting Alexandria on the path to becoming a city of knowledge and culture. It was a place many wanted to see, and so they traveled the Mediterranean to get there. A lighthouse was needed to guide the ships into the harbor, and that's why Ptolemy I Soter approved plans to do just that. It was called Pharos of Alexandria, with Pharos being both the word for lighthouse and the name of the island on which it was built. It's unclear which one came first. Standing for over 1,600 years, the Lighthouse of Alexandria is the only one of the ancient wonders to serve a practical and common purpose. Like many ancient civilizations and numerous other ancient wonders, the Lighthouse of Alexandria defined the city it resided in throughout its existence until it became victim to nature and time. Like the Library of Alexandria, the history of the lighthouse isn't always as clear as we'd like it to be. It's by no means as bad as the lack of concrete information we have on the library, but there are still some gaps in the overall history. Historians have managed to gather enough information, however, to create a logical accounting of the general timeline and events that took place during the Lighthouse of Alexandria's long and illustrious history as the beacon of the city and the ancient world. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great chose the site of the ancient settlement of Rhakotis, which dates back to 1500 BC, to be the location of his new shining city, Alexandria. It was built on an isthmus, a narrow piece of land that connected two large landmasses while separating two bodies of water. One of the early projects undertaken in Alexandria was the building of a causeway between the mainland and the small island of Pharos, the reason that Alexander the Great and his engineer Dinocrates wanted to build two harbor basins, one for commercial trade and one for military vessels. Pharos would hold the port or northeast basin, which was dedicated to military use, while the southwest basin on the mainland was used for commercial trade. In the process of creating this causeway, the main commercial port was cleared of sand and silt deposits that had rendered the port difficult to navigate. Dinocrates oversaw the construction of a major bridge to link Pharos with the mainland, which was 1,200 meters long and 200 meters wide. During the remainder of his life, the city of Alexandria continued to grow, but it only really started adopting a true identity under Alexander the Great's successor, Ptolemy I Soter, his general who succeeded Alexander following his death and the subsequent unraveling of his empire. Under Soter's leadership, the city began working towards ambitions of being a city of knowledge and culture, which led to projects like the Mausoleum, the Library of Alexandria, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria, started during Soter's reign and finished during Ptolemy II Philadelphus's reign. One major construction project of Soter's reign was the Heptastadion. Essentially, this was a giant causeway intended to replace the already existing bridge that had been engineered by Dinocrates, who designed the city of Alexandria. The name is Greek, with hepta meaning seven and stadion being a unit of measurement. So essentially, the name just translated to seven stadia, as it's difficult to determine the approximate length of a stadion in meters or feet. Over time, Alexandria was dubbed the largest trading post in the world and the largest port in the Greek world. That's not to mention the fact that the city during the early Ptolemies became a haven for scholars and a must-see for travelers. So naturally, with titles like these and people constantly trying to get to Alexandria, it meant there were a lot of boats coming in. But the journey to Alexandria was far from easy. and as you got closer to the Alexandria ports, you faced the most difficult part of the journey, which was that there were no natural visual landmarks guiding ships to the ports, and on top of that, the vast barrier reef that surrounded the port was hidden by the waters. As a result of all this, shipwrecks became far too common, causing hesitancy among merchants who wanted to enter Alexandria's port to drop off precious cargo. So Ptolemy I knew something had to be done and commissioned the construction of the Pharos of Alexandria, selecting the island of Pharos as its home and Greek architect Sostratus of Cnidus as the project lead. It was not only destined to help ships survive the journey, but also be a display of Alexandria's strength and that of the Ptolemaic dynasty. If you've got a grand idea like the Lighthouse of Alexandria, you're going to need a fancy website to communicate the scope of your project, and today's sponsor, Squarespace, is just what you're looking for. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform perfect for trendsetters. Whether you're an entrepreneur or a builder looking to build the greatest lighthouse the world has ever seen, Squarespace has all the tools you need to get the job done all in one place and on your terms. With Squarespace's next-generation website engine, the Fluid Engine, you'll be able to choose from a template and customize it to your heart's content. And unlike using an expensive web designer, your website will be fully functional on desktop and mobile from the get-go. And now, introducing Design Intelligence, Squarespace's brand new service that combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential. Design Intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful, more personalized website tailored to their unique needs and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. And best of all, if you're looking to sell your wares on your website, Squarespace offers flexible payment options with simple but powerful tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, your customers will have the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Ready to get started? Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now back to the video. On its face, you wouldn't really expect a lighthouse to ever make a list of wonders of the world unless buried amongst hundreds of other offerings, and even then, you'd think it's a stretch. However, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was far from any old, ordinary lighthouse. The lighthouse that would eventually grace the island of Pharos was truly a marvel at its estimated height between 103 to 118 meters for its purpose, given that most lighthouses are generally tall, skinny towers. Part of the lighthouse's existence that is somewhat up for debate is whether it was the first lighthouse ever or the first of its kind of lighthouse. Some believe this might have been the first lighthouse in existence and became the archetype of all lighthouses that followed. On the other hand, others believe it was just the first recorded lighthouse and that others existed before it, but in no way, shape, or form like the lighthouse on Pharos in Alexandria. While it's entirely possible it was the first, there's no way to say definitively that that's the case. Its size wasn't without reason. It needed space for the ascension ramps, which helped the workers of the lighthouse get wood into the structure using carts, which would eventually be taken and used for the fire at the top, but it's hard to believe it was all for practical reasons. Ptolemy I had money, and he wanted a statement piece just as much as he wanted something to solve a real problem in Alexandria. With the lighthouse's height and overall size, it was a dominant feature in the city of Alexandria and its skyline. And it was most certainly a statement, making it understandable as to why it became one of the ancient wonders. While Ptolemy I was the one to initiate the lighthouse construction, he wouldn't get to see the Beacon of Alexandria completed in his lifetime. There's a range of opinions on when certain events actually happened. For example, most sources seem to agree that Ptolemy I commissioned the Lighthouse of Alexandria construction in 305 BC. After that, things get confusing. The timeline of events gets incredibly muddled. Some sources say it only started construction in 298 BC, which would be interesting because that's 7 years later than when Soter commissioned it. This seems inconsistent with the general idea of Ptolemy I Soter, who was rather prolific and proficient in construction in Alexandria. But it's possible that in the 7 years between the two, believing for a moment those dates to be true, that the Heptastadion was being built, which prevented or delayed work on the lighthouse. The one issue with this line of thinking was that the need for the lighthouse was rather evident at the time, so you'd think there would be far more urgency. It's also possible it took a while due to the resources needed to construct the lighthouse. Most historians seem to agree that the lighthouse was finished at a cost of 800 talents of silver, which is twice as large as the cost of the Parthenon in Athens. Another inconsistency in timelines is how long it took to construct, with records saying anything between 18 and 33 years to complete. Regardless of when it started construction, it was completed after Ptolemy I Soter's death in 283 BC and believed to have been completed in 280 BC. But let's talk about the actual construction and what the Lighthouse of Alexandria is believed to have looked like. The construction of the Lighthouse of Alexandria was done in 3 phases, with each phase taking on a portion of the tower and decreasing in size with each phase. The first phase was more than half the tower's overall height. The final phase was at the top, which would hold the place where the light would be produced by a fire that continuously burned in the evening. It was also believed that the light was enhanced through the use of a burnished bronze mirror. The lighthouse was made of stone blocks made of predominantly limestone and sandstone, with other rock types making appearances like rose granite, granodiorite, marble, and greywacke. Limestone was a common type of material used starting in the early dynasties, with the most notable examples being the pyramids, temples, and tombs. Sandstone was used more from the late Middle Kingdom onwards for temples, primarily in the sandstone region of Nubia, southern Upper Egypt between Luxor and Edfu. After exhaustive studies conducted and completed in 2011 by Adel Akarish of the National Research Center in Egypt and French geological surveyor David Dessandier, it was determined that the materials mainly came from quarries in the Wadi Hammamat dry riverbed in the desert east of Alexandria, which was a major mining region and trade route. Capping the lighthouse off was a statue of solid gold of the Greek god Zeus. Some sources say the statue alone was dedicated to Zeus, but not the lighthouse in its entirety. It is worth mentioning that not everyone agrees on who the statue at the top depicted, with some believing it to be Alexander the Great and some saying Ptolemy I Soter. It seems somewhat unlikely that it would be either candidate, but it's something we're not entirely sure about, so it's always a possibility. The finished lighthouse was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Honestly, it's hard to say any modern-day lighthouse could even rival the awe-inspiring sight of the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Sure, we aren't 100% sure what it looked like, but thanks to archaeological findings and historians who've made sense of ancient descriptions and depictions on coins from the ancient world, we have a very good idea of what it might have been like. Descriptions of what the lighthouse looked like and its height vary from source to source, but it could be reasonably stated that it was between 103 to 118 meters, and was built on a 30 by 30 meter square base. For reference, the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is the tallest and widest of the 3 pyramids, was 147 meters tall pre-erosion. The lighthouse was also surrounded by a protective wall that had 4 battlements on each corner. We have a description from Arab traveler al-Balawi, who visited the city in 1165, which is believed to be one of the most detailed accounts. During his visit, he measured the tower in sections. The first section, the rectangular tower, which acted as the base, was 77.4 meters tall and 30.5 meters wide. The next section, which was the octagonal tower, was 37.5 meters tall and 16.5 meters wide. The final section, which was the cylindrical tower, was 17.5 meters tall and 9 meters wide. On the inside, there's an inner ramp that spirals all the way to the top of the building, where the fire burns. In his descriptions, al-Balawi described the interior as roofed with masonry, and allowed for at least 2 horsemen to pass at the same time. When it comes to what happened to the lighthouse, it's not necessarily a riveting story. The biggest enemy of the Lighthouse of Alexandria was Mother Nature, more specifically earthquakes, salt erosion, and tidal waves. It's believed that over 15 centuries, the lighthouse endured 20 earthquakes. The first 2 earthquakes that caused partial cracks in the structure were in 796 and 950. In 956, either another earthquake or just a lack of repairs from past earthquakes resulted in a structural collapse of the top 20 meters. The destruction wasn't left alone and was repaired, but by this point Alexandria was a very different city, so there were cosmetic changes made in the repair with the inclusion of an Islamic-style dome replacing the damaged roof and fallen statue that once capped off the Lighthouse of Alexandria. In August 1303, Pharos endured one of the most destructive earthquakes they'd had so far, which was categorized as severe. It was believed to have originated between 280 and 350 kilometers away from the island of Crete in Greece, with a magnitude of 8. The earthquake caused a tsunami with a 9-meter run-up, which made its way to Egypt, eventually hitting the city of Alexandria and, in turn, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Earthquakes continued from there, further destroying the remaining structure, which was nothing but a stubby remnant of an ancient world. Qutb, the Sultan of Egypt at the time, built a medieval military fort where the lighthouse once stood proudly, and even used some of the fallen stones to do so. So, what's the deal? Why were there so many earthquakes? The short answer is an unfortunate location. Pharos is close to two tectonic boundaries with the Red Sea Rift Zone, which is 520 kilometers away, and the African-Arabian Zone, which is 350 kilometers away. It's unclear if the demise of the lighthouse was just because of the earthquakes, or perhaps it was an inability to repair it as fast as the earthquakes came, or potentially no appetite to fix something that was of a different era. But the site was most certainly not abandoned entirely. But rewind a few centuries to somewhere between 1477 and 1479 AD, when the lighthouse was now in ruins. The Mamluk Sultan Al-Ashraf Abu al-Nasif Qutb ordered the construction of the Qutb Citadel, which became one of the most important forts on the coast of Egypt, serving as a defense against naval attacks. Covering an area of roughly 17,550 meters squared, an outer wall surrounds most of the Qutb Citadel, similar to the one the Lighthouse of Alexandria had. It's unclear how much, if any, of that wall is from the original wall of the ancient lighthouse. There's an inner wall that surrounds the courtyard of the citadel, which includes barracks and storage cellars. The ruins of the lighthouse didn't go to waste, though, with them being incorporated into the new fort and the citadel being made primarily of limestone with 4 towers, one on each corner. The Qutb Citadel has a striking entrance leading into the courtyard, which has the main 3-floored square-foot tower. The 4 corners of the tower have protruding balconies that were used to defend the city. There's also a tank nearby, which was used to provide both soldiers and horses with water. During its time, the citadel didn't go unnoticed by rulers beyond Alexandria thanks to its strategic position and size. Today, it's visited by tourists exploring Egypt and modern Alexandria. In 1994, on the floor of the Eastern Harbor in modern-day Alexandria, a discovery was made by French archaeologists led by Jean-Yves Empereur, physical remains of the famous lighthouse. Their exploration found collapsed columns, statues, 49 to 60-ton blocks of granite, 5 obelisks, 30 sphinxes, and columns that had carvings dating all the way back to Ramses II, who reigned from 1279 to 1213 BC, well before the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty. In total, Empereur and his team cataloged over 3,300 pieces by the end of 1995 through the use of both mapping and photography. Satellite and sonar images have revealed more remains of houses, wharves, and temples. Today, UNESCO is working with the Egyptian government to designate this zone, the Bay of Alexandria, as a submerged cultural site on the World Heritage List. Currently, you are able to go diving to see the ruins for yourself, which is surely quite the experience. It should come as no surprise that numerous proposals have been made over the years suggesting the reconstruction of the Lighthouse of Alexandria, with the first appearing in 1978. More ludicrously, some have suggested a skyscraper in the old lighthouse site. Intended to be part of the Eastern Harbor of Alexandria port's regeneration, it's an idea that can be sold well, but is probably best left in the suggestion box. If you were to go and visit Alexandria today, you'd notice that there's no separation between the mainland and where Pharos was, because now it's connected by land. You can visit the Qutb Citadel and see where the lighthouse once stood, but as for the lighthouse itself, it's long gone, leaving behind only an indelible legacy. It's hard to deny the mark on history the Lighthouse of Alexandria made. This massive structure served a practical, cosmetic, and strategic purpose. It helped ships avoid the rocky shores and served as a beacon of greatness for the Ptolemaic dynasty, the city of Alexandria, and Egypt as a whole. The lighthouse joins the other fallen ancient wonders of the world, which were all but one lost to history. It also joins the Library of Alexandria as being remnants of a dynasty long gone, but incredibly hard to forget. While in theory it was just a lighthouse, it was perhaps one of ancient Egypt's and the world's most important buildings for centuries. A marvel of human engineering and design. We only really know half the story, perhaps less, but some aspects of this fragmented history are undeniably evident. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was an awe-inspiring representation of an empire that demanded attention and was celebrated in the Hellenistic world. I hope you learned something today, and if you dug this video, be sure to comment your favorite ancient wonder of the world or complain about my pronunciations. Deploy your likes, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves learning about places and the fascinating history behind them. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.